get started. So welcome everybody to another session of Team Science and Translational Research. This is a place where we bridge across disciplines to improve lives. And we bring together faculty from different disciplines and colleges at FSU who've studied different translational phases of a single health challenge. And these phases tend to range, as they do today, from basic research on causal mechanisms to intervention, development, and evaluation to real-world translation and implementation. What we're trying to get across at all levels is that research answers questions and helps us solve problems. So we're aiming to try to transform ideas into interventions and design a future where science can provide effective real-world solutions. Our topic today is studying digitally assisted healthcare. What do we need to learn? So we'll see some examples of the crosstalk across disciplines. We'll start off with Justin Riddle, who's a professor in the psych department. He's a cognitive neuroscientist with a degree from UCal Berkeley. I love how he describes what his lab studies. It's how humans control their thoughts to achieve their goals. And he has been a very good sport in joining this group. We will be discussing the development of a tool to support shared medical decision making. We've asked Justin to come in and help us try to understand what might be going on in the brain and in people's thoughts when they're working in a stressful context of trying to manage a complex medical condition and make decisions about how to do that. The tool, the shared decision-making tool that we'll be talking about is called LabGenie, and it was developed by Jing. He is a computer scientist who trained at Columbia University, among other places, and he's now a professor in FSU School of Information and also director of the Institute for Successful Longevity. We hope that he'll tell us something about his motivation for developing LabGenie, some of the challenges that emerged in the developmental process, lessons learned, and maybe some knowledge gaps that still remain. So there's work for the rest of us to do. And Dr. Wang, Jing Wang, trained at University of Pittsburgh. She's now a professor and the dean of nursing at FSU. I know her early work well because I knew her mentor. I know her mentor. And because we worked in the same area, using mobile and connected health technologies to improve the treatment of multiple lifestyle risk behaviors among aging patients who have multimorbidity, more than one health condition. She has become an increasingly important figure in shaping nurse training and influencing healthcare policy. She serves as an advisor, serves or has served as an advisor to NIH, AHRQ, the Office of the National Coordinator, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So that's high level where you have an impact. Her experience gives her a greater understanding than most of us academics have of what it actually takes to get tools adopted, covered by insurance, and implemented. I hope, may be able to tell us something about what goes on in the mind of a CEO when they're trying to decide whether to adopt something. What are the trade-offs they think about? Who else is a decider, and what priorities do they care about? And so you can see why I'm excited. So each speaker will have 10 to 15 minutes to present. They may or may not use slides. We'll give about 5 minutes for any clarifying questions, very focused questions to them, just to ensure you understand what they said. And then we'll move on to the next speaker and so on. So we save the longer discussion for the end. And without further ado, let me turn it to Justin.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Bonnie, and for organizing this. Let me just get presenter mode going. So, I wanted to just chat with you all about my own perspective, which is being a basic scientist and some of the questions that I work with in my lab. To some degree, I'm not going to necessarily comment on LabGenie per se, but I think a lot of the topics I bring up will be, of broader relevance, and I'm happy to serve the role of commenting on, what we see from the basic science side on trying to get our ideas out into the healthcare system. All right, so yeah, to start off, really basically, what's the purpose of science? Well, we want to build technologies, advance medicine, and oftentimes we need to start with this very mechanistic work, understanding biology, understanding psychology and the human mind. But the goal of us basic scientists is that our work, can make an impact on the broader field. And so we're oftentimes trying to address,
People
um,
in healthcare.
oh, yeah, address some sort of like healthcare issue. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, got thrown off for a second. My lab in particular is very much interested in mental health. And so, given my experience investigating the neural basis of symptoms of psychiatric illness, I'm going to use this as kind of the example. And then, the topic of today might deviate, but, bear with me. This is like my background. So I'm going to focus on some of the challenges to translational work broadly, and then some of the emerging solutions that I'm seeing taking place in the field. And so we'll kind of jump around through some of these challenges, and hopefully this will relate to the broader discussion. So one challenge which we are grappling with is the kind of heterogeneity across the general population. So one example is in major depressive disorder. There is a wide variety of symptom expressions in major depressive disorder. So if we look at like the DSM criteria, we have depressed mood, loss of pleasure, appetite loss or gain, insomnia or hypersomnia, psychomotor agitation or slowing, fatigue, feeling worthless or guilty. And essentially, what this adds up to is you need to have 5 of these 9 criteria to meet, definition for major depressive disorder. But you could have 2 individuals who are both very much depressed, and yet they have entirely non-overlapping symptom expression. And so, 2 people could meet the same diagnosis within the healthcare system, and yet experientially, symptomology is almost entirely non-overlapping. And so one of the challenges in basic science is that using categories like depression has really not been very productive for finding neural correlates of depression. So, what we're seeing as a movement in the field is a shift towards more specific symptoms. So, instead of using broader diagnostic categories, we are attempting in the mental health space to try to lock into more specific expressions of various symptoms. And what we're finding is there's a better chance at finding neural correlates and potentially cognitive correlates. So this is some of my work showing that, for example, in depression, this was inspired by other people in the field. There's sort of an anxiety, emotionally dysregulated variety of depression, and then there's kind of a lack of pleasure, a motivational variety of depression. And these 2 different classes of people might respond very differently to drugs or to various interventions that might be applied to them. Another challenge, somewhat related, is the vast kind of individual differences that we see in people. So this is one example where people are using magnetic brain stimulation for the treatment of major depressive disorder. And what we found is that there's a pretty robust treatment response by targeting the left prefrontal cortex for the treatment of depression. And yet we find that there's a lot of variability. And by learning more about people's brains, and in particular, there's different circuits in the brain, the ability to more specifically target these different circuits has led to massive improvements in our ability to treat depression in the first place. So we're seeing a lot of sort of innovation in spatial targeting in depression in particular. As we begin to personalize more and more, there's kind of this wide range of various things that we can start to think about. And one domain that my lab has been really interested in is thinking about not only the circuits that we're targeting in the brain, but sort of the activity patterns that are being expressed in the brain. So this is kind of a basic science study that I'm showing you here. This is a working memory task. You're holding these colored squares in your mind. But what we find is that there's different brain regions involved in holding these, random colored squares in your mind. And there's different activity patterns being expressed in these different brain regions. And when we deliver brain stimulation to these regions that are involved in this memory process, if our brain stimulation is aligned to this activity that is naturally occurring in the brain, we find that we can facilitate people's memory processing. But if our stimulation is misaligned in time, kind of at the wrong frequency of what is occurring endogenously in that person's brain, we can actually end up disrupting that activity. So it's showing, essentially the better we can spatially or temporally align our interventions to the endogenous activity in the brain that we're trying to target, the better and better our treatment is likely going to be. Um, in the example of depression, we are currently struggling from a really severe lack of biomarkers. So there's, a cool study that comes out and says, oh, we found some neural correlate of depression. And then a bunch more studies come out and fail to replicate those simple biomarkers. And so, this is particularly a problem with psychiatric illness and some of the, neurological disorders that people face where we don't even have, very solid biomarkers to work with. And so people are kind of, stretching at figuring out how do we better find these biomarkers? One biomarker in depression I'm giving as an example was the putative frontal alpha asymmetry, that maybe the left and right prefrontal cortex have different specializations and there's an imbalance in depression. And this was a really compelling idea for many decades. And in the last decade or so, we've kind of scrapped this entire enterprise and given up on frontal alpha asymmetry, for example. One thing that I am very passionate about is that I think there's a lot we can leverage in the domain of cognition. The idea being that maybe a psychiatric illness is the culmination of many cognitive processes occurring over a long time frame. And if we can understand the cognition and the thoughts and feelings that are occurring inside of someone's mind and figure out aberrance or atypical patterns of thought of impairments in cognition, this can be a way to kind of ground psychiatric symptoms into specific neural circuits. So this is an AI generated image, but it beats the kind of Adobe Illustrator version that I made. But one hope that we have as cognitive neuroscientists is that, our field of studying cognition and measuring brain activity and these different cognitive tasks, that right now it is very mechanistic and we're very much in the laboratory, usually studying healthy individuals. But, I really believe that as we're trying to grapple with kind of the challenge of understanding mental health and psychiatric illness in particular, maybe a bridge to connecting into the brain, into specific neural circuits, is by really carefully assessing cognition, using the tools of cognitive neuroscience. And so I'll kind of come back to this idea, and I think this is something that could really contribute to the domain of digital health, which is, the topic of today. So what does this look like in the lab? This is like a recent publication of mine. We have people with depression come into the laboratory. We find some deficits in this example, a reward-based decision-making task. Greater symptoms of anhedonia are correlated with a reduction in kind of responding to reward to guide goal-directed behavior. There's a clear neural correlate, in this case, prefrontal motor coupling, as people are interpreting rewards and using that to change their behavior. And then here we're using electrical stimulation, targeting the prefrontal and motor cortex, attempting to increase this coupling between prefrontal and motor cortex that we found was decreased in these patients. So we first, identified this target. We have a precision method of trying to increase this activity. We then demonstrate evidence of target engagement by delivering this electricity to people's brains. we're able to sort of improve that neural correlate that we found was deficient in these individuals. And then finally, we see changes in cognition in line with a restoration of the behaviors that we found deficient in the initial step. So this is, what these approaches look like in the lab in this kind of hardcore cognitive neuroscience setting. But our goal is that, these tasks that we are using could maybe be translated into cognitive assessments in a healthcare setting. And these, treatment interventions that we're testing out, in these briefer administrations could potentially be rolled out in broader, larger scale studies to try to make an impact in people's lives. So, what's my predictions for the future? How will cognitive neuroscience make an impact in the future of healthcare? I think that, doing a cognitive task seems obscure and maybe seems abstract. And I've heard this from, program officials at the NIH or colleagues that are more like in the medical domain. People aren't going to do these tasks. To which I say, well, maybe they will. Like maybe when you go to to see your doctor in the future, they give you a video game and you play the video game in the hospital, or they can send this to your house. You can play these video games, and these games are actually measuring different cognitive processes and getting some sort of metric of reward processing, inhibitory control, cognitive control, decision making. There's kind of a wide variety of cognitive neuroscience approaches that could be gamified, and you could, essentially be receiving, similar to how Jay is going to talk about, receiving like a list of bio data from your doctor. Maybe in the future you would get kind of a battery of cognition, and this would be assessing the various circuits and brain functions that are at play in an individual, and you would have a similar need to kind of digest these for your patients. In the future, while maybe some of you haven't heard of brain stimulation or it seems scary or foreign, I think we are really seeing a takeoff in non-invasive brain stimulation and invasive brain stimulation. And really the sky is the limit, and we're really in the early days of searching these parameter spaces. And I think these tools have a really high potential to be applied to a wide variety of particularly psychiatric and neurological disorders. So I think we'll see more and more of this in the future. And hopefully we see more at-home treatments. The Marone Bixen's lab just had this really breakthrough study where the FDA approved at-home direct current stimulation for the treatment of depression. This is a real kind of landmark in healthcare. And so I think we're going to be closing the loop faster and faster, rolling out broader at-home studies, using brain stimulation, using these gamified assessments. And hopefully, this becomes kind of the new normal of what we could expect, particularly in the domain of brain stimulation. And finally, just to highlight a little bit of our recent work in the lab, we're currently trying to combine, traditional psychotherapy approaches with non-invasive brain stimulation, because a lot of these techniques are so, they're so non-noxious. Like you can actually receive stimulation without really having too much disruption in your day or in your cognition. And so we can actually combine a lot of these techniques with existing healthcare interventions. And I think there's a lot of potential to kind of augment existing therapies with this kind of new line of interventions. So thank you for your attention. Yeah, thank you to my lab and for Bonnie and the other presenters, and looking forward to chatting more at the panel component. Yeah, so happy to take a few questions if we have them. But oh, you're muted, Bonnie. Sorry.
Sorry. I have to say, I didn't expect the intervention to be that much fun. I was envisioning pacemakers in the brain. So, but
Nice.
what questions did people have, if any?
Justin, I came a little late, so I didn't catch the first part of your
You
presentation.
missed all the compliments. I'll send them to you.
I'm curious, like with sort of the newly FDA approved home-based test, through your kind of lab-based research or how you work with, your patients coming to your lab, like what are some of the factors where if the patients are at their own home with themselves or their caregivers, do you worry about sort of, when we're trying to translate from a lab setting into a home setting with those, do you trust that like the intervention can be delivered with what we call treatment fidelity in a way to kind of
Mm-mm-mm.
carry out the same kind of intervention effectiveness that you kind of have in the lab? I kind of just looking at you as an expert to tell me like if I'm looking at the home base and as a nurse we may need to deliver that, and if it gets commercialized later, how what are the factors do I need to even watch or look at, because it's maybe
Mhm.
effective in the lab but there may be something that may get lost, so I'm curious.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Great
Yeah,
question.
I mean, I can comment from what I know. Yeah, I know Marome, and I've seen him give a lot of talks on this. So how they ran this study was they did Zoom-based monitoring. So there was like a nurse or, one of the research personnel, like
Okay.
observing them applying the electrodes. And these are not involving paste, like you kind
Yeah.
of dip them in some saline and you strap it around your forehead. And
Got it.
with electrical stimulation, like the precision of the placement isn't super important. Like if you're off by a few, maybe a couple centimeters, you're not going to have too much detriment. And then they have an
Okay.
app that they developed, and so there were certain codes that were required to activate the stimulation. And so they were able to log like through some cloud-based platform,
Hmm.
was the treatment delivered to completion? And there was sort of a unique code given to every treatment, so there was no ability to kind of like abuse the system and use it outside of protocol.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think, and then yeah, they threw them away after every use. So it was like these one-time use pads, and I've
Hmm.
seen the setup, and it seemed pretty decent. I mean, of course, people can mess up things you wouldn't even imagine they
Got
could
it.
mess up. But yeah, I think with like a light level of documentation from like a nurse or like even just like a digital interface, you could probably
Hmm.
pull off a
Got it.
level of precision.
It's a
Perfect.
great question.
Yeah.
I am actually, and there's another question in the chat. Oh, actually, you have a couple more questions in the chat. What I'm going to do, though, in the interest of time and being fair to
Yeah.
everyone, I'm going to move us along. I'm going to ask if, Justin, you might take a look at the question in the chat and see if you could answer it in the chat. And we will
Sure,
have
sure.
more time at the end, but
Yeah,
I'd
sounds
like
great.
to.
Yeah, I'll just type my response. Yeah. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. So, sure, you're up.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can share share my screen. Great. Can you all see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Bonnie, and everyone for joining this session. It's a great pleasure to be here. And honestly, I've been giving this type of talk in different places, but I think I do always value to give this presentation to our dear colleagues here at FSU. And I do see there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate on similar projects and moving AI forward. So the thing that we're trying to focus on is not only developing some sort of digital health applications, it's really trying to figure out what is the best paradigm to kind of move this type of thing forward in this all the kind of hypes of AI and also with the hype of digital health. What are the things we should be doing more responsibly, more carefully in order to make sure that we're not really kind of cross the line for medical decision making. So we're not trying to develop something that will replace doctors. So this is typically the first thing I tell people about. Is not we're not really trying to replace doctors with AI. So that's the main thing. So what we're trying to do is to facilitate and be able to activate patients, into a more proactive roles, because patients oftentimes are passive recipients of medical information and the medical services, but they don't really engage that much because they don't really understand the information being provided. So we're trying to empower them, to be able to, participate in shared decision making in a more effective way, in a more meaningful way. So the project we don't kind of talk about today in a nutshell, is it's a tool that I've been working on actually from 2018. It's been quite a few years where we started to look at the problem of medical decision making in the space of lab test results understanding, and also what information support can we provide to patients in order for them to have a better kind of confidence in participating in this type of shared decision making. And as you all know, a patient portal has been one of the major sources of information for medicine, especially patient-facing applications. You can use patient portals to access your lab results, to send messages to our providers, and also schedule appointment. And among all these activities, actually, one of the most frequently used activity is to access your lab results. But the information presented in patient portals for lab results presentation is not the optimal way for communicating information, because oftentimes what they do is they just throw you with this medical information without providing you with enough kind of explanation, or telling you what does this value really mean to you in terms of its agents, urgency, and how would you be able to act upon it. So patients have confusions. Patients may not be able to follow up with their doctors in a timely manner. So there's so many things we can do to help patients better use this data, because lab results data are some of the most useful information for medical decision making. And in the past, we also have found that for older adults, this information is especially more challenging to understand because of the age-related changes, such as hormone fluctuation, cell counts, altered organ functions, and the reference ranges provided in patient portals are often specifically designed for general population, not specifically for aging population. So even if there could be a fluctuation, we just don't know how to interpret it. Most of the interpretation done in the clinical settings are done more empirically. So in one of our previous studies, we have done using ADRD patients, Alzheimer's disease patients populations. We did found that there are, among the 18 lab tests we have evaluated, 7 of them actually had a statistically significant fluctuation over the different seasons over the years. But oftentimes this type of issues and problems are often overlooked. So in order to really make better decision for older adults, there need to be some tools and methods that can really help with accounting for this kind of seasonality, multiple chronic conditions, polypharmacy, and there's a lot of things we can do, to improve the current way information is being presented and used. So LabGenie is a tool that aims to help patients, especially older adults with multiple chronic conditions, better understand their lab results by using AI as a tool to provide more clear, contextualized information. So we wanted to be able to empower patients, as I mentioned before, to ask better questions and make informed decisions and play a more active role in their healthcare. So we're trying to really develop this type of applications in a very user-centered way, meaning that we're definitely keep kind of engaging our potential end users from the information needs assessment to prototype design to evaluation and to further evaluation of the usability, acceptability, etc. So this whole paradigm of user-centered design has been our central piece of research in this, which we work very closely with our collaborators in the community, like FIAHSI Senior Center. So have conducted a variety of different studies, including participant design workshops, including online surveys, including online experiments. So all of this information that we've done in the past 2 years, since we started this project 2014, have allowed us to really gain a deeper insights into what older adults actually need to know and how we can better present information to them. So for example, in the first set of studies, what we focused on is just how to better visualize information to patients. So like even though in patient portals, you might see there's a fairly homogeneous way to present information like lab results of patients, in real world, patients may not be able to fully understand that meaning. For example, some patients would like to see more like grading color type of graduation between different reference range intervals, and because they want to have a gradual sense of progression of risks, whereas other patients, they want to have a more clear-cut information about their levels and where they're at. So there's definitely different type of preferences. And also patients may also have different preferences regarding the use of different labels on this lab values, lab results reporting, so that they have a better understanding about where their values are. So we also have conducted web experiments, making sure that we're still analyzing data, but in a nutshell, what we're trying to focus on in this web development is to be able to kind of randomize patients based on their numeracy level. So we want to make sure that we have a equal representation of patients with high literacy, high numeracy, and low numeracy and low literacy, so that when we look at how to better present information to them, we can better understand how we can present this to both patient populations with different literacy levels and different numeracy levels. So we give them hypothetical scenarios and give them not only the presentation of labs, but also the interpretation in the most understandable and the most easy to use language, and also giving them hypothetical questions they can follow up with a doctor, so that patients will be able to know like how to prepare for their next visit to the doctors before they get a chance to talk to them. And we'll ask them questions about whether they have a better understanding of the urgency, and so that we can assess whether information presented in different ways can have a better outcomes, behavioral outcomes, to ensure that they fully can leverage this information for their shared decision making. So in the back end, we have done a lot of work in order to understand how to better develop AI solutions in a responsible and iterative ways. So this one, just like you want to give you one example of how we look at generating questions upon lab results in the context of patients. So this is done in a iterative way. So we get data from real world electronic health record data, de-identify all of the information, and creating realistic clinical profiles with major conditions we're concerned about. And then we use artificial intelligence, tools, large models like GPT models and other open source models to generate questions based on major patient's profile. And then we iteratively evaluate the understandability, actionability, and also the clinical significance of those questions with doctors. And also we even ask them like whether they're willing to answer those questions if someone raises a question in clinical setting. And once we come up with a good sort of prompt to generate those questions, we further evaluate the readabilities and also conduct a patient evaluation to make sure that patients can understand this information and found those questions also useful. So these are just some of the example question prompts we have developed and generated based on different rounds of prompt engineering. So I can see like over different iterations, we're able to kind of add additional information to the prompt to make sure that patients found it more tailored, more individualized. And then when we evaluated this type of questions with clinicians and patients, we found that the responses are fairly positive. Like in general, from a Likert scale 1 to 5, most of these questions for evaluation, we got fairly reasonably good scores from both clinicians and patients. But in our teams, we found that providing information like this may not really activate patients, because if patients cannot really fully understand why these AI models make these connections in the back end, still patients may not be able to fully act upon this information or be able to ask this question meaningfully. Because also based on literature, people found that if patients are asking questions raised by AI that are too complex, doctors may overestimate the literacy level of patients and may give patients even higher like complex responses that may not really help patients understand this information. So what we are currently doing is to change this paradigm from focused on how to orchestrate information from patient EHR into complex questions, into how to create like activating questions, more behavioral questions that can really be used by patients. So as you can see, the new questions we're trying to generate are much more shorter. It looks like it's simpler, but in the back end, we actually have done a lot of things to make this simple but still meaningful. For example, we're trying to categorize patients into different risk tiers based on their EHR data. And then we're trying to make sure that all these different tiers can, we can kind of provide guardrails to make sure that, certain messages are being generated so that we're not really tapping into the diagnostic or treatment recommendations. We're not really trying to kind of replace doctors by giving them too much information that they're not supposed to know before they actually get a chance to talk to their doctors. So these are just some of these, questions in the recent round we have generated using the new version of the prompt, focused on behavioral intention, focused on activations instead of focused on like interpretation of information. In a more rigorous way. So these are some of the interfaces we have designed. As I mentioned, this is a UI UX part of it, which we work closely with not only our internal teams who are with a UX UI researcher, but also we work with outside company who are doing professional UX UI design to make sure that the interface have a understand have a acceptable usability and usefulness. So we kind of had different rounds of discussion about how to create different stories to make sure that patients, when they get a chance to look at this interface, they don't really have to, really spend too much time figuring out where things are to understand how to find useful information. For example, in the first interface, they are seeing the overview of their labs, the question they can follow up with the doctors. If they want to go deeper, they can look at specific questions related to a particular lab and also specific information about the particular panel, the interpretation, the value range, and also see the trend over time and be able to use this information in a more meaningful way. So we also designed this interface both for web browsers on the desktop, but also on the mobile interfaces, so patients can be able to use different devices to see the information. And in the back end, as I mentioned, we are, I'm actually I have a computer science background, so we're very much interested in looking at what are the boundaries of AI right now? What are our capability of AI in doing things that seem to be a little bit more sci-fi like? So we have conducted several studies in the past 2 years. Focused, the first study we have done is trying to understand how good AI is in answering AI kind of lab results questions. So we get a bunch of questions from social media and trying to use different AI models, including ChatGPT models, but also some open source models to answer those questions, and then evaluate with clinicians how good these questions are in terms of their safety, relevance, accuracy, and helpfulness. And then we also did a study, published this paper last year in Nature Digital Medicine, focused on once we get the case information from patients in the symptoms, their lab results, and also their patient reporting information, how can we predict the differential diagnosis for these patients? So we look at the published literature and try different models to see whether the differential diagnosis that are predicted by AI is going to include the actual prediction, actual diagnosis made by doctors in this published case reports. We have also done studies to look at how AI is, whether AI is capable of providing accurate reference range for individual patients based on different contextual factors, and also developing a benchmark data set for evaluating AI in answering questions about lab results reference ranges, and also more recently looking at how AI is providing not only like responses to causal questions that are framed under Julia Pearl's causal frameworks, by framing the questions into counterfactual, into association, and into interventional questions, and then see how AI is able to provide reasonings to those responses and whether the reasonings are corresponding to their answers provided. So these are some of the papers that are also under review. So in the more recent work, we have got funding from National Institute on Aging. We're trying to look at how we can move this project forward by providing a more sort of agentic AI framework to have a way to further kind of ask information from patients to provide further information that are not available in EHR. For example, symptoms or behaviors that patients can observe or the caregiver can observe to collect that context. Basically, based on this context, we could generate even further accurate information about patients' kind of lab results, and then we could using AI to even evaluate those responses and then be able to provide understandable information back to patients. So these are just some of the examples I want to kind of quickly show you. For example, this is a patient clinical vignettes with demographic conditions, medication, recent lab results, and the symptoms reported by caregivers. And then with these AI patients, we're able to do research about these lab results and also medications used and figure out where these labs are in terms of their normalcy, and then whether we should be be concerned about these labs based on their risk levels. And then bucketing them into different risk tiers and generating question prompt visit, question prompt, tailor messages to interpret the labs in a more understandable way. And then using this greater AI agent to evaluate the responses. And if the evaluation result in terms of its clarity, coherence, and the relevance to the clinical profile are below particular threshold, or even the safety may be a concern. If we don't want to dig into the diagnostic route, we could trigger clinician review. So make sure that we're not really presenting patients with something they shouldn't be seeing. So further using this agent to modify the language to make sure that the information is understandable by patients. So certainly there are a lot of challenges in the space. As I mentioned, we're working very closely with our healthcare system partners. The TMH is one of our partner. So we're trying to get EHR data from their EHR systems, which are currently under Epic, through a technology called the FIRE. So this technology allows patients to directly log into their EHR without, with their with their credentials for MyChart, and then they will just have to authorize their data to be transmitted from MyChart to LabGenie, and then we can use that information to, generate information for them. And that part is challenging simply because we need to make sure that, first of all, our system is built within a HIPAA compliant environment here at FSU, and we're able to keep patient data safe, secure, and also we're using AI models. We'll have to make sure that those AI models are not going to use this patient data to further train their foundation models. So all of this have to be done very carefully. So actually every week we are meeting with FSU's IT team to look at our security, to look at our privacy, to make sure that all these security measures are put in place. So certainly another challenge is because AI is advancing so fast, we have to constantly evaluating AI models to make sure that we're not missing important problem with it. We're very responsible because we want to look at not only the response quality, but also whether we need to put any additional safeguard to protect information being generated. And certainly on the patient side, we know many people have hesitancy to adopt AI models. Clinicians may have also trust issue in AI models. So how can we build this in a responsible way and including patients and the clinicians in the loop as much as we can so that they will fully be able to trust this model to be able to generate information for them in a meaningful and actionable way. So a few lessons learned, including things like we have to engage patients from the early beginning of phase of the study so that we don't miss opportunity to learn what they need and how to present this information to them. Certainly, sufficient input is important to make sure that we're generating information in a meaningful way. So happy to engage in conversations. I know there will be some questions follow up, but I really want to give a shout out to our team. And that actually Dr. Jing Wang is actually part of our advisory board members in this project. And I work closely with my collaborator, especially Dr. Mia Lustria, is a health scientist, health communication scientist, who is leading the human center, human factor research study part of this project. And we receive a few fundings from different agencies. And even though there's a lot of uncertainty on top there about whether we can continue to get funding from HRQ, I'm really hopeful that they will continue supporting us. So fingers crossed that we'll be able to carry on this project in the next phase of the grant. But I'm really hopeful that the research like this, as I mentioned, is not going to be generating a tool, but also it will producing a lot of useful knowledge for the community to learn about the best practice to develop AI. And we're also learning a lot from the community as well, by understanding what others are doing in this space. So with that, I just want to thank our partners and thank you for your attention.
Oh, this is wonderful. Wow. So interesting. And you are able to do things that I didn't think were possible to do at FSU. So I'm very glad to know that. I'm going to ask you some
Thank you.
questions later.
Sure.
Questions, sort of factual or comprehension questions for Jia.
Joe, did you do your evaluation study yet?
We have not fully launched the evaluation study because that was part of our phase 3, which is supposed to be starting this year. So we're just waiting for the funding to arrive, but we're fully prepared to launch the user study for evaluation. We're using simulated data for evaluation, but we're hoping to using real data to evaluate the system.
Okay, but do you plan to have this app or web-based portal to be inside a EHR environment or like a standalone just for the purpose of your research evaluation?
Currently, it's a standalone application, but as I mentioned, we're hoping to using this technology called FIRE to make a connection to EHR. So
Yeah.
technically, even if the app is sort of hosted within FSU environment, with this FIRE application, you can consider it as an integrated application. But we're getting data from EHR. We're not getting data back to EHR.
Okay, so
Yeah.
but what's the workload for the patient? Do they have to just click and then their lab results will be kind of automatically uploaded to your app
Yeah.
or web portal?
Yeah, that's the idea. So technically what's going to happen is that patient need to log in LabGenie first, and then LabGenie, they will click a button to get to their MyChart portal, and then log in MyChart and authorize their data, and then their data will be pulled from EHR directly to LabGenie. That's one-time authorization.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, really interesting work. Yeah, it's exciting to make this product. Are you guys are you leveraging an existing like large language model or yeah, and then I guess like to what degree does that large language model need to specialize in any of this any of the topics that would be relevant for the hospital setting or is it like enough just to have these kind of general models?
We are currently evaluating in our evaluation studies. We're evaluating different type of models, including closed source models such as OpenAI's models like GPT-4, GPT-5. We're also evaluating open source model like Llama models or some other models that are made available through OpenAI's through FSU Azure environments. There's AI Studio in there which we can call their APIs. And I would say like for some of the tasks that are less demanding for medical knowledge, open source models can do a pretty good job. But for more highly sophisticated models, we found that using model alone, even GPT models may not be providing strong enough answers. So, for example, in a previous study I mentioned for providing kind of accurate reference ranges of lab tests in a different context. For example, given different age group, different gender, oftentimes it doesn't give you the accurate answer. Like 50% of time, it doesn't give you a correct answer. So I had to pull credible health information data from like credible sources like Mayo Clinic, like NIH, to create this embedding sort of vector store so that data will the model will be able to retrieve information from them to generate information. So sometimes we have to rely on this kind of RAG approach or even fine-tune open source models to do the work. In our agentic AI framework, because there are different pieces in it, we're hoping that some of these pieces can be completely run using locally deployed open source models instead of calling ChatGPT APIs, because that definitely gonna make sure that our data will not go out at all. That's the plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
Sure.
Just amazing. Well, again, I hate to cut this off, but we'll have more if we get through our next presentation, have time to all talk. So, Dr. Wang, I would love to hand the stage to you.
Great. Can you see my slides well?
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a huge screen, so I always worry about how it will be presented. Well, it's so great to go after Justin and Joe. I kind of have been kind of doing the type of research in different areas, more focused on self-monitoring and remote monitoring, and nowadays more to digital twin and smart homes, but more focused on the implementation side, of course, me as a nurse, conducting clinical trial in the real world setting. However, more recently, I have been kind of partnering with an organization on Coalition for Health AI, and have really worked them really closely in different working groups and sit in their advisory board, kind of sort of looking at as we're translating research into the clinical settings and think about ourselves as a CEO or chief nursing officers to see why should we consider some of the research products into implementation in our clinical settings. So I'm going to use LabGenie as an example, but very hypothetical to think through beyond what we need to demonstrate in research studies, which we're very familiar with testing a digital health solution in a clinical trial to see what is the efficacy of the intervention or the product, and what are the patient outcomes can we demonstrate that are effective, or how much cost is, for those of you who do consider cost, but really think about from an adoption kind of model, what I call adoption calculus. What are some of the factors, and what would a clinical executive team from a health system's perspective, sometimes is even whether to buy this product or not, or sometimes whether even I would allow the research project to be conducted in our healthcare system. So I think using a similar tool, just such as the LabGenie, there are kind of three major factors that from those executive teams' perspective that we would consider. One is, what is the fit? How does it improve or fit with the patient experience that we would like to have? And that being if it's too cumbersome, that's why I asked the question. If it's too cumbersome for our patients, that we work so hard in a clinical setting with the healthcare team to really improve that streamline processes for our patients. How would this product or introduction to this product, be it in a research setting or in a real world, we're going to purchase this product, how would that impact their experience? How would that impact the clinical outcome? Many majority of the products are focusing on, or the research tools are focusing on what will help patients manage their conditions or will reduce the likelihood that they go back to our hospital or visit the emergency room. So those are definitely very important factors for the healthcare systems or operational efficiency. And in the nursing and clinical operation world, we talk about workflow. So currently, I cite this statistic a lot that about 50% of nurses' time are spent in front of computer. So documentation, everything in front of computer, and we don't have enough nurses. So if we're introducing something new, how would that disrupt or facilitate? Will that give our nurses time more back to the bedside, or will this like reduce physicians' time and their burnout? Looking at a lab or a diagnostic tool, would that create more patient questions that would trigger both the nurses and doctor need to respond in the MyChart portal? So all of that, will the research be able to give me some of those data so I know what we'll be getting into? Because there are a lot of research that are out there that have tested similar, not in terms of lab related diagnostic tool, but with some of the agentic AI supporting nurses or doctors in documentation or in patient response. It actually, because of the sort of LLM model, is more comprehensive than what a typical doctor or nurse will spend their time on. So it's like, what's in it for us if it increase my clinicians' time to respond, because they create a lot of great template, but increase their cognitive load and in preparing the response to the patients, because there still sort of needs to be the human in the loop, and how much safety in terms of those automation can help or actually create more work and disrupt the entire efficiency that we currently have in the workflow. The friction trade-off is how can we benefit? We kind of know, okay, this is going to work based on the research and the amazing theoretical and evidence that's generated from the research study. How this will benefit clinically for a well-informed patient against the potential for providers' time loss. It's kind of that entirety of the time that we are valuing from a healthcare system's perspective, be a provider, sometimes even a nurse, is that that I mentioned, that so much time is spent in evaluating the tool or being this, I need to be in the loop to ensure patient safety. So is it actually creating more time loss for our clinicians or not when you have such a well-informed patient nowadays? Not only through the MyChart portal, even during the visit. Normally, it probably will take 5 minutes or 4 minutes to change them around. Now I have a patient with like 10 questions generated from these, coaching them how to ask the right questions. And how does that impact the outcome versus sort of the efficiency and the time loss between that concept? And also, I think a part of the, very common for the C-suite in healthcare is addressing these concerns on liability and black box nature of AI-driven patient communication. When first the clinicians and the executives need to be educated. Where these large language models are trained and what are the implications for the risk for the information that are guiding patients to think through. Will that trigger more false alarm? Or how should we evaluate the tool? How can we kind of trust the research data that you provide us for the evaluation? And who's reliable in a way that we were in a scientific conference talking about these tools that a lot of the major corporations, such as Microsoft or IBM, all of them, they know the game. They will make sure they have nothing to do with the liability, and it's all on the providers. So as a provider and as a clinician or as an executive in healthcare, how can we work collaboratively to understand we value the research and we kind of value the results of these patient outcomes and the clinical efficacy and effectiveness of the tool. But how do we balance that liability? And, how can I trust with the large language model trained by especially open source data when it related to the liability side of, for example, if we patients believe that they're being diagnosed like taking the chart like I'm diabetic, what will their response, and will the healthcare system be held accountable by, saying, well, you told me in this lab data, it says I am diabetic. How much would that trigger, lawsuit or others as it kind of, it is generated by AI? And are we held accountable for those whatever shows or whatever values that we show to the patients? Should we still hold the clinician, for example, physician, accountable for the diagnosis accuracy, regardless of what the lab value shows, or should we just stick with the lab value by itself or implication, but have the note or a legal disclaimer to say this is, generated by AI. The diagnosis still need to be conducted by your clinician or something like that, and for a C-suite to trust the implementation of it. And to give all of you, this is sort of the healthcare AI community are trying to develop these what they call governance model, because who's going to set the guardrails when AI presents limitless opportunities. At one point, I know organizations such as TRI, they unite all the industry leaders, major academic health centers, to say, we want to develop a testing lab across the major academic medical centers in the US to produce like a nutrition label, like when we eat food, we kind of know what's in the food by looking at the nutrition label. Can we develop a nutrition label for AI products and AI solutions? And then have these labs test based on the nutrition label provided by researchers and others to say, well, where did you train the data? Where were the data that you received that that you used to train your model? And what exactly are the patient population that you test your product? And all of that. But this is part of that governance model. I kind of want to give you an overview. It's very likely, depends on the healthcare system scale. It may kind of range from, they may have all these rules or they may not have much of this rule. It may be a combination of rules, but governance is key when we really think about implementation or adoption, and what are the major stakeholders thinking through, who will say a veto so you may not be able to pass through. Having your product tested or implemented in the healthcare system. So CMIO is, of course, focus on the eliminating the click fatigue, and these are what the informatics community are more familiar with. There's so many alarm fatigue for the clinician side, but for CMIO, for medical informatics officer, it would be more focused on the fatigue from the clicks. The tool must reside natively within the existing EHR, but for testing, you may not need to. But for those major health systems, if you want to roll out in the entire system, it's very hard to imagine that it's not, operating within the EHR environment. Sometimes these roles are combined. Sometimes you have a CIO, CTO, or chief information security officer, really focus on the security part, want to vet the entire data pipeline. And if you are connecting any data, the HIPAA compliance, the end-to-end encryption for all of the lab data, these are kind of non-negotiables, and they may test your platform to see, what are some of the leaks and kind of do those kind of pressure tests to ensure security. Clinical needs, a lot of times, and you may have a chief nursing informatics officer or doctors or nurses, depending on what's the application areas that you have. Again, this is another workflow test to make sure if the tool will scale across the different environment from the specialty clinics to high volume primary care settings or emergency rooms, right? Like, again, time is gold in healthcare system in terms of their providers, especially, doctors and nurses and all of them. So how can we ensure the adaptation is seamless across this environment, especially in those more intensive environment? To the other side is like you're targeting primary care, but the volume is so much bigger. The other piece people don't normally talk about, and we probably don't care too much as a researcher, but it's critically important, is a business person, chief finance officer, will really look at what's the return. And this is a better chief finance officer that I put here. It's return on mission. Otherwise, it will be entirely return on investment. How much money do I need to put in, and how much money will I get out? And to really justify the allocation of all the technical and financial resources that we need to put in. So I think my last slide before the question will be, how can you then, as a researcher, thinking about translating or developing a tool that ultimately you want a healthcare system to adopt? For example, Joe, if you want to scale LabGenie, and what kind of proof do you need to think through from the technical, operational, and patient-centered side? You have done a great job thinking through, a seamless handshake with FIRE standards for reliable, real data exchange with existing systems. Because at the end of the day, even it's what in the tech community talking about interoperability, but ultimately in the health system executive's mind, it is their goal, it is their time, it's their workflow. And also similar concept, but is that this data approving the tool does not increase administrative burden, because we're all preaching the concept that we're leveraging AI to save time for clinicians. So we can't really allow those unintended consequences that actually increase time to charge for clinicians, and then we go the other way around. I think currently a majority of those governance models, no matter kind of which major health systems you talk to, this is a non-negotiable with that you need to demonstrate all possible angles to make sure you are not increasing the time that will take the clinicians, especially compared to the potential patient outcome improvement and time and all of that. And patient agency, and I think patient satisfaction is really important. I think health systems appreciate, especially for a product like LabGenie, is to shift from more passive recipients to active informed partners in the care plan, in hopes that it actually will reduce clinicians' time, reduce the emergency room visits, reduce readmission, which is a huge cost to the healthcare system. But for those, it's really hard to demonstrate in a research project in a pilot study. So how can you think along some surrogate measures that can kind of lead to those potential outcomes that a healthcare executive really cares about? This is more, a question kind of throw back to Joe, from the team science perspective, the implementation handover that I kind of was preparing my presentation, thinking through what will be the next step once Joe finished his study and want to push this as a commercial product and want a health system to really adopt that. So given the points that I have mentioned, it's where were the specific friction point identified in the research study where users struggle with AI suggestions? did they ever doubt about because it's a black box AI? How much can I trust that? Or they're like, well, this is so smart. And I wish this is the right tool that I really need to have that meaningful conversation that both need to happen between the provider, but ensure that the patients are really taking an active role in taking care of themselves in their care plan. And also kind of identifying these early, I believe will allow us to build operational guardrails before the clinical rollout, because it's all about the guardrails that we need to set between these kind of research to implementation side. And I think the technical capabilities that you talk about are amazing. Is like how can we really align those with the psychological and logistic realities of a high volume clinical environment, that the incentive for the executives and the clinicians are the volume of patients that we can turn around. And if the whole system is built like that, even in value-based care systems, so how can we leverage both in those volume-based or the value-based healthcare systems where you should target based on the results that you have to turn those research insights into deployment-ready design. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow. Wow. You did exactly what I hoped. I, I'm not even going to bother to work my symbol there. I'll just clap out loud. I actually have a question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
And it's based on um, I for many years taught in the Columbia obesity. They have a week-long program that they give people a certificate of some kind. And I used to teach the technology piece. And I was very intrigued that the first year that I work with these mobile tech devices, connected devices. And so I would pose the question to the physicians in the audience, would you like to get these data? Would you, so we know about their weekly weights, about their physical activity, but would you like these data? In the first year, they all wanted them. By the second year, they were very nervous about liability. And by the third year, they were sort of divided. And I think of this a lot now as we're dealing with the rural health transformation issue. And so clearly the way that certain states are dealing with this is what really matters is the rural clinical partners, the people who are actually treating patients. But what has pitched the sale of this rural health transformation is we're going to fix everything through magic technology. And so what you have is a situation where we're just in the process of bringing together all these rural clinicians um, just to deal with the governance structure that they know about. But they, at some level, want all these toys. So I think about things like hospital at home and this question of the signals are going to have to go someplace. And staff is already overloaded. Are they going to want them automatically triaged and diagnosed? Are they going to trust that? Are they going to know enough not to trust it fully? How do you recommend dealing with when you put this stuff into a community-based context?
Mhm.
What
Yeah.
should we do?
Yeah, I think that's where companies are making money for. Because the technology itself is no secret. And there's not much for all of us working in the tech field, especially those in healthcare. It's not really the technology itself, ever that, maybe developing platforms, but really when I think about it, it's the legal component, the workforce component are a lot of times the most important. When I test, we did a large service with patients with all their mobile wearable, remote monitoring data, and asked them who do they want to share with. Guess who's the number one they trust? It's their healthcare professionals. And the healthcare professionals don't want to receive them. But you know what? No matter you want to receive them or not, you're gonna have a patient who's gonna bring their Apple Watch, bring their Fitbit, bring their blood pressure monitor, and right now even the glucometer. The continuous glucometer is in consumer
Yes.
space right
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
And I always think from this angle. Before we have all this technology, you and I work in similar field, that we ask people about their diet and exercise in a clinical visit. And it would take me 30 minutes to do the intake, to do a really good dietary recall. Um, we did a study and reduced it to be less than 1 minute. Yes, there are issues, but when I think about a regular visit that I would do as a nurse educator, it actually saves me tremendous time by having patient recall and how much clinical decision that I'm making based on that patient recall. And nowadays, with all of this data, depending on from which angle you look at, and that's why FDA is struggling, right? Like there are so many, for example, Fitbit and Apple Watch. It's consumer tools on diet and exercise. But there are those FDA approved clinical decision tools that are based on extracting data from these diet, exercise, wellness, consumer products and use it in actual medication, adjustment, and that becomes a FDA approved tool that you can get to trust it. But then there are more security wise in terms of, that's what I talk about. Each data point, the chief information security officer is going to make sure that they're all encrypted in a way, and that's part of the HIPAA compliance of a tool, right? All of those need to meet the standards. And it is not just the data encryption, it's also the people who need to be trained at every level to ensure that. So HIPAA itself, when you talk about a HIPAA compliant platform nowadays, it is not just the technology and the encryption, the security itself. It is also who are allowed to touch what level of data that are going through these platforms and whether it's actually the right patient data. When you talk about home-based collection tools, that is it this actually the patient or is this actually a caregiver or like who by accident was just to play the toy and get this data and will you use that to address the medication? Patient may die from it, right? So I think that those are the scares. But if you've done it right, that if you understand all the possible issues, and that's why I kind of challenge people like Jill to ensure those factors are considered. Because if you're the researcher, you actually would know those friction points really well. When we collect the data at home, do you need a picture to ensure it is actually the right patient identified? And who would do that verification? Like if you're in a hospital, a nurse will do that verification, right? What's your name? What's your patient ID? So when you are in a hospital at home environment, who will do that identification? A virtual nurse, the platform, the initial intake of that platform. So it's think about the workflow that we currently have in the healthcare security system, and then do that in an environment that you can still trust the similar things, but the IT security and the nurses, and it's just like what I asked Justin the question, is you just need the tools to ensure that all of these factors are considered and there is either an active human, a real human, or there's someone who you design a bot that is checking everything for you to ensure this data is reliable. And the FDA has all of those things sort of figure out at this moment. It's just they're still trying to decide that there are still so many gray areas between consumer technology and medical grade FDA approved technology. And there's a lot of crossover at this moment, depending on which side are you thinking from? Which side of the story can you talk about?
And also, I want to add that based on the recent so sort of the JAMA AI Summit report, currently there are like 1,200 FDA clear like tools and over 350,000 plus consumer application that can generate like over 70 billion market. But out of this, 600 plus AI tools that are FDA approved, many of them actually had went through not only the regular clinical trial like evaluation, they just went through this 510K clearance pathway, which means they don't have to be rigorously tested. They have to be demonstrating that they could have equivalent kind of marketed with equivalent to legally marketed predicted device, and they have an intended use which are similar to these devices, they don't have any safety concerns, they can be approved to use in the market. But they have not been fully tested on their clinical efficacy and outcomes. So there's a really great area, as Jing mentioned, that there's a lot of loopholes there because of course those companies are trying to make money out of those commercial devices and products, and the
Yeah.
regulation is not up there yet to regulate those things adequately.
Yeah, that's why governance, local health system really need to hold the guardrails and governance really tight at this moment because currently our federal government's mandate is that they don't like high regulation. So that's why for organization like CHI, they step down to say we don't do these insurance. That was a mistake. That concept was a mistake. We don't do these assurance labs anymore to ensure the quality because in order to accelerate, so there are kind of, it is very dangerous in a way that there is like a legal counsel group within the CHI that they're just talking about all of these risks and governance all the time. But I think we really have the people who have the expertise, who understand all levels of risk at this moment. It's just to kind of bring people together. They don't normally work together, like the lawyers, like the technologists, like the clinicians needing to understand, now I need to verify it's actually that patient that I'm taking care of because now I'm not seeing them in front of me anymore.
What do you think one thing that I'm seeing to sort of step into this gap? So we talk about human in the loop, but the big expensive humans are the nurses and the doctors. So one thing that's happening, I'm a part of a collaboration with Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York that's doing cancer treatment at home. And they have developed a new category of staffer she's not a nurse, but she is somebody who was there to basically, it's almost like monitoring treatment fidelity or serving as what might be technology to verify that it's the right patient. What do you think about that direction? Because I think I'm seeing more and more of that.
I guess whatever it takes because there's nurses are getting more expensive nowadays.
Yes, right. And
What
scarce.
Yes, when I was conducting research, all the doctors will say, "Well, I'm dependent on my nurse to, intake, gather all the information for me and tell me what I need to do." So that saves my time in, reading through all of this data, which I think AI can be like a great potential tool to support, identify trends, identify, potential alarms. Need to be careful about the alarm fatigue. I think you will continue to see both caregivers, family caregivers, or
Yeah.
professional caregivers kind of fit into that category that you are
Yes.
talking about,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
taking a more active role
Yeah.
in being the care team. You see a lot
Yeah.
of digital companies that are using not to say that they're cheaper, but like nutritionists, exercise physiology grads to
Mm-hmm.
be in these kind of health related field, but really taking a leading role because they understand part of, human reaction, even sometimes, very closely in the clinical context. Or even like just like lay caregiver,
Yes.
a pure
Exactly.
family member to be in it. I think as long as there's supervision,
Yeah.
it'll be good. But I also think with how fast AI is accelerating, um, I think those jobs can be replaced by AI.
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah. So we can now open it up to questions and discussions among the speakers. Questions you have for all of the different speakers. Let me just open the floor to abundance of riches here. So lots of opportunity to ask what you'd like to know or hear thoughts. I see Sylvie appearing.
Yes, I just showed up. So this is kind of a broad question. So anyone could jump in, but I've just been very, very much interested in the concept of precision behavioral medicine and, more just trying, Bonnie and I do a lot of thinking about multiple behavior change and, really honing in on like what are the core behaviors or things to focus on in treatment. and all of you contribute to that in different ways. And so I was just wondering if anyone had any thought. Like I'm just envision like a center grant, like what would like how could these different perspectives come together in something like that?
I guess I can start probably more on that translation side, but I really can see, a lot of the work that Justin and Joe are doing really can contribute to, from, there are different kind of diseases that you are dealing with or different behavioral factors that you are targeting, either from a lab diagnostic piece or what are some of the targets from, brain stimulation that can trigger multiple, symptom care or management, and how can you translate that into there are different treatment response and how you will tweak your intervention or behavioral strategy based on the patient response, given that you have comorbid conditions, like multiple conditions, like both suffering depression, anxiety versus a chronic condition, and translate into there are multiple behaviors that you may be targeting. So in my mind, and I haven't even touched, and I think none of us have even touched sort of the point of, omics, multi-omics, that individual response will be very different in terms of these both at-home based technology tools or just web-based tools that you get from your healthcare system. So I can see like where you are picturing, Kyle, Sylvie, when you think about a center grant where, we can put things. I think definitely thinking through the translational landscape is really important. Like I see beautifully, like what Justin is doing is very like the theory and the concept are so relevant. And except that I'm gonna have a hard time to like convincing any nurse or doctors to understand it, but it's so useful. Like how can I like translate a lot of those into the translation to deliver individualized care. And I leveraging a tool and kind of really amplify what Jira's work doing is going beyond the lab value into, monitoring of the behavioral factors and watching their treatment response, like giving, all the different interventions you and Bonnie are doing. And how can we really accomplish that individualized, or people call it precision care, that consider those, the response based on the omics factor and all the usability of the platform factor, and ultimately testing kind of the patient outcome. So that's sort of the angle that I can see. Maybe there need to be core methodology group, and there need to be core technology and implementation group. And that itself, yes, it's a center grant. It's
Oh,
just
I
my
also
perspective.
Yeah, I also see a lot of potential here. So, for example, for the LabGen project, we have been really transforming the project as we're making sort of progress. So, one important change we're making is to engage patients, into not only providing not only like being the recipient of data on the information, but also be able to present, provide information back to the system so we can get a better picture about context. For example, we're trying to collect patients, can be the symptoms the caregivers can observe, and also the behavior changes, their diet, their medication adherence patterns, their nutrition patterns that can potentially be observed, that can be fed into these tools, that we can use this information to better tailor information for them. So, so as Jing mentioned, other mentioned, instead of going to the doctors and then be able to memorize what has happened, you can present this information on the fly. For example, I recently visited UF Pepper Center. Their director is doing a lot of great work in using devices to collect information from patients whenever they have something to report. So essentially, there's a lot of opportunity for us to collect those information on the fly, and then so that patient don't have to even remember those. So those kind of behaviors in collecting data to be able to report their behaviors and report their symptoms could be a really game changer in the future medical decision making and the data collection. And also from the intervention side, I do see also a lot of opportunities to leverage data as one way to sort of reduce the time for translation. So for example, recently we have got a pretty promising score for our one, which we collaborate with my collaborators at Mayo Clinic, and they're using EHR data to develop methods to sort of better present, like, tailored in treatment to heart failure subtypes. And then based on the simulated, emulated clinical trial results, they can further evaluate how likely this treatment can really be kind of effective in the particular subpopulation before they actually launch the real patient clinical research. So there's a lot of opportunity to leverage data for even emulated trials. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So I think data science, AI, digital health applications, those are all some of the really promising sort of new technologies that we can leverage in this space.
Maybe I'll throw throw my piece out. Yeah, I really view the role of basic science as trying to find like paradigm shifts in a sense, and we're doing a lot of the more like high risk, high reward type of projects that, oftentimes just completely fail, and we learn something from it and we try something totally new. And yeah, I really think it's up to this class of like translational scientists to then take these ideas and then iterate on them. And just to, I don't know, give one anecdote from my experience. So I was doing some research in like an epilepsy unit where you get access to like invasive recordings in patients. And yeah, I was really blown away by like the speed at which the field had moved from resecting parts of the brain and removing parts of the brain to treat epilepsy to then having deep brain stimulators, and then to having closed loop deep brain stimulators where they're like recording and stimulating. And yeah, it was really cool to see that in a hospital setting there are, there's doctors reading the literature and then in a rapid way, we're just trying out these things in patients based on what they're reading. And science is always going to move very slowly, but it's going to try to operate at the next paradigm. And then, yeah, I was just very impressed to see, doctors implementing these ideas and just kind of trying things out because, people's lives are at stake and their well-being is at stake. And so you don't have time to run every clinical trial possible. And sometimes you can just make an informed guess based on the evidence. And that is probably like the best option for this individual person. So yeah, I was really, blown away by my first encounter with like proper seeing some healthcare in action. And it moves so much quicker than we move in science. And there's just very different roles that we're playing. So,
Well, I have to give the plug that Carrie usually gives to please fill out the evaluation. Carrie, can you tell them how to find it?
Yes, so I put the link in the chat. There's also a QR code here on the slide. I also plug the last seminar in the series is happening on April 24th from 1 to 2:30 with Elizabeth Hammock, Heather Flynn, and Kayla Byers.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. It was well worth waiting for. And thank you all for making my day.
Thank you for having us.
Take care.
Thank you for having
thank you
us.
for having
Thank you,
us.
everyone.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Everyone, have a good weekend, everyone.
You too.